this is Ryan Regan, the founding partner of HT Excel and the economics course director at HT Excel. So if you're watching this video right now, I assume probably you have your IB mock exams or your IB final exams very soon. So in this video, I'm going to share with you all of the tips that I have for you to get a level 7 in your IB economics exam. So actually I used to be an IB student myself and I got a high 7 for IB economics, and over the year me and my team we have taught over 1,000 IB students in economics in the past 3 years. Okay, so we've seen all kinds of students you can imagine, and we analyze IB papers a lot in order to develop our exam techniques and strategies. Okay, so in this video I really want you to pay attention because these tips can really make a difference to your score. Okay, so first of all, so in this video what I'm going to tell you is the following things. So first I'm going to talk to you about the topics that are most likely to show up in each paper. Okay, so there are some key topics you have to study well in order to get a level 7. Okay, the second thing I will tell you is exam strategies you need to know for each paper, paper 1, paper 2, and paper 3. Okay, then I'll talk to you about the amount of time you should use in each section of the paper, because a lot of students ask, how should I time myself? How should I use my time? Right, time management for exam. And then finally, I'm going to talk to you what I think is the most effective way for you to study for your exams. Okay, how to study. Let me start off by talking about the questions that are most likely to show up in each paper. Okay, so for paper 1, in paper 1 there are 2 sections, the microeconomics section and the macroeconomics section. So if you're in HL for the micro session, the most likely question to show up is about theory of the firm. Almost, I think every single year, there's at least one question from the micro section that is about theory of the firm. So you need to study cost, profit, revenue chapter and market structures. Normally for part A of the question, they'll ask you something about cost, profit, revenue, or something about market structure. Just some factual things, just ask you to explain some concepts. Second part normally is asking you to evaluate a market structure. For example, they may ask you to compare 2 different market structures, or evaluate whether the government should intervene in a market structure. So you need to study market structure well. Okay, if you're HL for the micro session. For the if you're SL for the micro session, I guess you need to. It's not that much. Okay, so normally you have elasticity, okay, government intervention, and market failure. Only these 3 topics. Okay, if you know these 3 topics well, I can guarantee you there's at least one of the questions you can answer very well. Okay, now moving on to macro. For macro, I think normally HL and SL have the same questions. Okay, so what are the what is the topic? So normally it's macroeconomic policies, supply side policies, and demand side policies. Okay, supply side policies and demand side policies. You have to know how to evaluate them. Okay, so evaluate the uses of the policies to meet macro objectives. For example, evaluate the use of supply side policies to increase growth, or for another example is evaluate demand side policies to increase growth, things like that. Okay, so for evaluation questions, definitely know the macro policies. But for part A, they can ask you any kind of factual question from all the topics. It's really random. So I would suggest you to study inflation, study unemployment, study economic growth, and the policies. If you know these things, I think you have a 95% chance of knowing how to answer the question very well. Paper 2. So for paper 2, I think HL and SL are very similar. Okay, so for paper 2, the trade section, there are 2 sections, right? Trade and development. For trade section, I would suggest you to study protectionism, exchange rates, and trading blocks. You can ignore balance of payments. Balance of payments, sometimes there's one question of balance of payments. But then if you study the topics I mentioned just now, protectionism, exchange rates, and trading blocks, you will be able to answer all of the questions, okay? And then for development, okay, development is a bit tricky because it's very scattered, okay? The way I study for development, I think that you should study for development is you should look at the syllabus, IB syllabus, and look at all the command statements. And by answering all the command statements is the best way you can study for the exam, for that section, because anything could come up. And actually at HT Excel we have notes that incorporates all types of questions that could show up, and I think that could really help you, okay? And yeah, so now let's move on to talk about how to do well in each paper, okay? So I think the whole idea behind, okay, so I'll give you some general tips first. So in general, when you write economics essay, you need to write in a very concise manner, okay? So it's always cause and effect. Every sentence is a cause and effect. For example, you will say, an increase in interest rates increases the cost of borrowing. The increase in cost of borrowing reduces the willingness to borrow. And that that would reduce consumption and investments. Okay, things like that. So every sentence is a cause and effect. Okay, no BS. Okay, so and in paper 1, there's part A and part B, right? So in part A, it's normally asking you to explain some sort of phenomenon. Okay, the key things you have to have is definition, the correct definition. You need to draw diagrams that relates to the question. Okay. Oh, actually, you need to draw diagrams. You need to explain the diagrams, and then you need to answer the question. Okay, a lot of students don't answer the question. You need to actually answer the question. Okay, give the concepts that are needed to answer the question and real life example. These 5 things. If you have these 5 things, then you should be able to do very well. Okay, and for part B. Normally, it's an evaluation question. For evaluation question, it's a little more complicated, but normally, I guess the most tricky part is the conclusion. Okay, how do you conclude? How do you make a judgment at the end? Okay, so for that, you can look at short run and long run. You can look at different stakeholders. You can weigh the cost and benefits. Okay, and you can say it depends. Okay, so yeah, because in many cases, whether something is true depends on a number of factors. Okay. So cost and benefit analysis means that you weigh the cost and benefits, okay? So now let's move on to paper 2. So in paper 2, there are 4 parts, part A, B, C, and D, right? Part A is definition, so part B and C is a short question, part D is evaluation. Okay, so part A, definition, you should aim to get 4 out of 4. A tip that I would give you is, whenever you have define a term, try to give a real life example as well. So even if your definition is wrong, you still have the real life example, and that can help. Even if you have a vague definition plus a precise example, that can give you 2 out of 2. Okay, so always have an example for your definitions. For part B and C, what you have to do is, those are 4-mark questions. Normally I think they are quite simple. If you know your stuff, if you know the basic concepts, you should be able to answer them. Okay, so I would say 80% of the time, you don't have to read the article to answer part B and C. You can answer part B and C without reading the article 80% of the time. So a lot of students waste time by reading the entire article first before they answer all the questions. That's actually very inefficient. Okay, so I would suggest you to go answer part B and C without reading the article. But sometimes you have to read the article though. So if you read the question and you think that you don't have enough information to answer the question, then you read the article. But normally, in the question itself, like for example, they will ask you a question and then in brackets, they will tell you which paragraph the information is from. So you just need to read that paragraph, okay? But most of the time, you don't need to read the article to answer part B and C. Sometimes you do, but even if you do, just read the paragraph that they tell you to read, okay? And for part D, for part D, the point is here is that you have to make as many references to the article as possible. Quote the article as much as possible. Okay, and when you quote the article, don't just quote the article. You need to quote the article and bring out an argument that helps you to answer the question. So, for example, they may say something like, okay, the tariff have helped, like for example, in the article they may say, a lot of domestic producers are shutting down because of cheap imports, because of dumping. Then you can highlight that and then say, okay, so protectionism can protect domestic producers from dumping, okay, by increasing the price of imports, right? Things like that. So this can help to protect domestic jobs, okay? So what you would do is basically you quote the article and bring out an argument that helps you to answer the question, okay? And normally, so must make as many quotations as possible. One more thing, normally you have 4 paragraphs. The first paragraph is introduction, define terms in your introduction, and then in your introduction also say that there are advantages and disadvantages. So for example, if they're asking you to evaluate a tariff, you can say something like, in this situation, the tariff has advantages and disadvantages. So that is a good introduction. Then you have 2 paragraphs, advantages and disadvantages. Most of the time, advantages and disadvantages work, but sometimes another structure might make more sense. For example, they may ask you, evaluate the consequence of trade protection on China and US. Then in this case, maybe it makes more sense to have 1 paragraph on China, 1 paragraph on US, okay? Then you have your conclusion. So for conclusion, for evaluation conclusion, as I said, you can talk about long run, short run. You can talk about different stakeholders, weigh the benefits and costs, or you can say it depends, okay? So one more thing. Normally for paper 2, part A, B, and C, I think you should aim to get full marks for part A, B, and C. So that would give you basically 13, so 12 out of 20, right? If you get A, B, and C, all right, you get 12 out of 20. Okay, so even if in Part D, if you just get 4 out of 8 in Part D, which is a very low score, you would still get a level 7. So if you get 100% for Part A, B, and C, which is highly achievable, and you get 50% for Part D, you still get a level 7. Okay, and I think because for Part D, it's very difficult to get full marks in Part D, but it is very easy to get full marks in Part A, B, and C. Okay, for Part D, even if you do very well, you might only get 6 or 7 because it's very subjective. It's an evaluation question. Okay, so you have to aim to get A, B, and C full marks in order to get a level. So now let us address another question that I think many students have, which is how much time should I allocate in each part? This is actually a very simple question to answer. So a logical way to do it is to look at how many minutes each mark is worth. So you find the total number of minutes you have to for the exam, for the test. You divide it by the total number of marks. Okay, so then you can see how many minutes you should spend for each mark. Okay, then you multiply it by the number of marks, and you can see how much time you spend on each paper. Okay, so let me give you an example. Okay, for paper 1, the total number of minutes is 90 minutes, right? 90 minutes. We have 1.5 hours. The total number of mark is 40. You have 2 questions, each 20 marks each. So you have 40 marks and you have 90 minutes. So you do 90 divided by 20. Okay, this is the number of minutes you should spend on each mark. Okay, then you can multiply. For example, if one question is 10 marks, then you can do 10 multiplied by the minutes per mark. Then you'll get the answer. So as I remember, you should spend about 19 minutes on Part A and 27 minutes on Part B. Make your own calculation. I hope you understood the logic just now. Find out the minute per mark you should spend. How many minutes you should spend for each mark, then multiply by the number of marks. Okay, very logical way to do it. Another thing I think you should do is you should definitely you make good use of your reading time. It's very effective to make good use of your reading time during the reading. You have 5 minutes of reading time before your exams, right? Make good use of that. So what I would suggest you to do, because for all papers in economics you have a choice of which question to do. You should read the question, read all the question, and make the right choice about which question you should do. You should do the question that you're more confident in, that you can get a higher mark in. So make sure you make a right judgment. Read the entire question and think about whether you know how to answer it. And make sure you choose the question that you can get the highest mark in. Okay. And another thing I would suggest you to do is start to think about a mental outline. Okay, for paper 2, I would suggest you read through the articles. You should try to look for arguments for Part D during your reading time. And for A, you should think about which part of the syllabus is the question related to. Try to think about which concepts you should bring out in order to answer the questions. Now, let me talk to you about how to study for IB Economics. I'll share with you exactly how I studied for economics. So before, when I was a student, first I read through all the notes that I had from my tutor or from school. I tried to understand all the concepts first. Okay, make sure you understand it first. Okay, but even if you understand it, doesn't mean that you can regurgitate it into an exam paper. Okay, because IB Economics is basically regurgitating concepts into paper. That's basically what it is. Sometimes there are little tricky things that need you to think out of the box, but the primary thing you need to do is regurgitate concepts. So you first need to understand the concepts, then I would suggest you to look at as many past papers as possible and write full answers, okay? Because when you write full answers, basically you're practicing your ability to regurgitate concepts. It may be surprising, but sometimes when you understand a concept, you're not able to explain it yourself. You understand it, but you can't explain it. That would get you a very poor mark. You need to be able to write your answers. Okay, so what you do is at home, you should write full answers for your past papers, for the past paper questions, okay? Make sure the quality of your writing is at least as good as a textbook, okay, but more concise. The thing that I would do if I were you is, you don't have to study all topics in IB Economics, because some topics always shows up and some topics almost never shows up. So in the beginning of this video, I told you the topics you should study, right? You should focus all of your energy on those topics, okay? Make sure you know how to regurgitate all of the concepts, okay? And do as many papers as possible and write full answers. Hope this video helped you for your final revision preparation. Okay, so good luck with your mock exams or your IB finals. Okay, see